Radhanatha Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachadine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Asjajate Satharine He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sudhe Devi Pranamami Hari Hari Pranamami Hari Hari Anshukarupaduruyascha Kripa Sindhubhya evacha Patithanam Bhavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Grateful to be with all of you this evening at the great Stanford University. Thank you very much for being with us. I was asked to speak on the subject of engineering a better world. In the world we live today, we have spent and are spending enormous sums of money and energy to explore outer space. But there is so little focus on understanding our own inner space. This balance is so critical to the future of the world. This is a universal principle that all wisdom, culture, spiritual paths, and religions have taught us. In the Bible, Lord Jesus tells, what profiteth a man who gains the whole world but loses one's eternal soul? Ralph Waldo Emerson, he wrote that the reason our society lacks unity, is broken, and lies in heaps, is because man is disconnected from his own self. There was a very great physicist who had a conversation with Albert Einstein. They were discussing science and how they were going to try to move forward to do better for the world. And this physicist, he gave a very profound realization. He said, our Western culture is like a fantastic, well-built ship without a compass. Science, technology, and all of these various forms of education which are developing at such a rapid pace today could either have the most incredible benefit to human society and all living things, or great destruction. It's very important. Perhaps more important than any other time in world history, that we really connect with real values. We really connect with ourselves. Otherwise, even with all good intentions, we are creating havoc. I was just speaking with my dear God brother Vaishnava. I'm going to tell you a little secret. This book, The Journey Home, I promised His Holiness Bhakti-tirtha Swami when he was on his deathbed that I would write this book. I didn't want to write it. I said, isn't it an act of arrogance to write a book all about me, I, me, mine on every page? And I don't believe anyone will believe it if I tell the truth. And he was in his last stages of melanoma cancer. He had one of his legs amputated, tumors all over his body. When I first went to visit him, his doctors told him that he had 3 days to live. So I rushed to see him. And the next morning I was going to leave. And he said, I only have 3 days to live. Promise me that you will stay with me. I want to die in your arms. So I made the promise. And he lasted 8 more weeks. It was the most intimate, extraordinary experience I ever had with a human being. Because we had nothing to focus on except spiritual upliftment. What a beautiful experience that was. And one day he told me that, why don't you write a book about your travels in search of truth? And I told him the same things I just told you. And said, no, I will not write this book. I have already been asked by so many people, and I will not. He said, it is an act of arrogance on your part to think that it's your story. This is not your story. This is God's story of how he took a man who was looking for basically the same thing everyone's looking for. Fulfillment and meaning in life. And if your book, if your story can actually inspire people to look deeper, then you are arrogant to not write it. Promise me on my deathbed that you will write this book. What could I do? He was my dearest friend. So I promised. And when I walked out the room, I was committed within the next few days to get him to allow me to withdraw my promise. But before I could do that, he died. He passed from the world. So I had to honor that promise. He wanted me to write it for a general audience. So I've been reading scriptures for 40 years. I don't know how to write for a general audience. So I was at Taruni and Yarunandan's house, my dear godbrother and godsister, and they are very well-read people. The room they put me in was a big library. So many books, all classic books and modern books. So I didn't know which one to read, just to get a sense of how to communicate. So this is something I do often. When you don't know how to do something, we all have our ways of dealing with it. I pray. So I close my eyes, I said a prayer, and I walked toward the bookshelf with my finger like this. I touched a book. I had no idea what it was. I took it off the shelf, and it was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So I was thinking, this is what God wants me to read. I mean, I saw the movie back when I was a little child, Boris Karloff and everything. I started reading it. It's a powerful book. It's about a scientist who really, really wanted to do something wonderful for humanity. He wanted to actually put life into a dead corpse. Start somewhere. That means he wanted to free humanity from death. He had good intentions. He was a nice person. At least that's the way it comes out in the book. That's all it was, really. But somehow or other, he had an ego that he was the doer. And he meddled with nature in such a way that he really didn't have a foresight of how it was going to influence the environment. And was he in harmony with the laws of nature and the will of God? And it ended up, he worked so hard. He was really an engineer. And he actually he was trying to create the ideal man, like all these strong, taking all these pieces and putting them together and sewing it up. Lightning and electricity. That corpse came to life. It was a success. But then it became a monster. And destroyed his whole family and terrorized him for the rest of his life until his death. Science and technology can do so much good if we have a real education and real values. In today's world, there's an environmental, ecological crisis going on in this world. It's not being caused by the simple farmers. It's being caused by people who really have a tremendous amount of scientific, technological knowledge and experience. I just heard from a man who's actually extremely powerful in the business world. He's one of the greatest contributors to medicine, to curing various kinds of cancer, as far as raising funds and orchestrating. And he had a statistic from the American Medical Association that within our generation, 1 out of 2 males will have cancer sometime in their life. and 1 out of 3 females will have cancer sometime in their life. It wasn't like that in the past. There's so much toxins in the air, toxins in the food, and so much stress in life. With all our science and all our technology and our ever-increasing computer age, internet age, is the quality of life actually getting better? We have to take a step back and actually think about it. Otherwise, like Frankenstein, with all good intentions, we create a monster that comes to haunt human society. And by the time we realize what's happened, that monster becomes so powerful, it's out of our control. You see, with knowledge comes responsibility. With wealth comes responsibility. And it's very important. It's not just about politicians who compromise for the sake of getting bribes. Scientists who compromise for the sake of getting funding. Educationists who compromise the real value and quality of life to hold their positions. My Guru Dev Srila Prabhupada gave this analogy that everything in this world could either have a positive or negative effect. Especially the powers that are coming through science and technology today. Like a knife. A knife in and of itself is neutral. If that knife is in the hands of a criminal, he will slash someone's throat with the knife to steal their money. The same knife in the hands of a surgeon could compassionately restore a person's life. Is the knife good or bad? It just depends on the values of the person who's holding that knife. William Shakespeare wrote, "If you lose your wealth, you lose nothing. If you lose your health, you lose something. If you lose your values, you lose everything." We require a strong foundation in order to uphold sacred values within a world where there are so many temptations and fears all around us. It's like this building at Stanford University. The architecture is wonderful. Seating is wonderful. We may appreciate so many aspects of it, but how many of us are thinking about how wonderful the foundation is? Foundation isn't seen, but the fact is the foundation holds up the entire building. So what's happening today is we are building technology, science, architecture, everything, education, academics, we're building it higher and higher and higher levels. But unless we have a strong foundation of inner values and character development within human beings, then it's just a matter of time till it all crumbles down. Integrity means that we have sacred values in our lives. And whatever we do, whatever we achieve, is built on the foundation of those values. Even if there is temptation. That if I compromise my values, I can get so much more. Or even if there's fear, that if I don't compromise my values, I could lose so much. But the quality of life is not in the quantity of what we achieve, but it's in the quality of our life. It is said that we get things to make a living, but we give to make a life. Again, the Bible. It is said that if you build your house on shifting sand, then when the storm comes, it will crumble. But if you build your house on solid rock, no storm can shake it. And the fact is that whoever we are, whatever we have, whatever our position, the nature of this world is there will be storms. There will be success and failure, victory and defeat, honor, dishonor. There will be love, there will be betrayal. It's life. If we want everything to be our way, it's like deciding, I just want summer to last forever. There's going to be fall, and there's going to be winter, and there's going to be spring, and there's going to be summers too. Everything changes in this world. Integrity is not based on the circumstances. Integrity is based on that inner foundation of character, of values. My beloved Gurudev, Srila Prabhupada, he writes something that deeply affected me when I read it. He said that the greatness of a person has to be estimated by how he or she is able to tolerate provoking situations. Anybody can be wonderful and moral and ethical and giving when it's all favorable for us. But when there is a provoking situation, and this word provoking, it doesn't mean it's provoking the way I want it to be provoking. If we could select the provoking situations to be, yes, this is a test, but it's a test I like, and it's a test I need to grow in and flourish in, it's not provoking at all. It's provoking when it's really a challenge. It's really what we don't want. It's really when people are just nasty sometimes. That's a provoking situation, and it hurts. It's not provoking unless it hurts. Am I going to maintain my integrity? That's greatness. And it is that type of greatness that the world needs so much. It is that type of engineering of our own consciousness, of our own values. That is the most vital form of education. Plato, he described education as just bringing out what you already know within yourself that you have forgotten. The Bhagavad Gita explains real intelligence, true intelligence, is when we rejoice from within, when we are illumined from within. There is an analogy that I learned many years ago in the Himalayan jungles about the musk deer. This particular deer has an organ that excretes an oil that is so fragrant It's intoxicating. Have any of you ever actually seen the organ and smell of a musk deer? Well, I have a friend who lives in Bombay, and he keeps it in his closet. It's about this big. And he opens that closet. The whole house is perfumed with the sweetest, most aromatic, intoxicating fragrance. The excretions from a musk deer sell in the American market up to $40,000 a kilo. Can you imagine that part of your body when you're smelling it? Well, the deer spends his whole life searching for that fragrance because he really wants to have it. He wants to have that fragrance, and he smells it, and he's looking for it, searching for it, searching. He's going through thorn bushes and getting all cut up and scarred, and he's crossing over rivers and almost drowning, trying to find that fragrance, and ultimately dies without ever understanding what's within himself. That's us. We're all looking for happiness. Anandamayo Vyashat. Every living being, we all have this in common. We are seeking pleasure. Wherever there's life, there's a search for pleasure. And there's all sorts of mechanisms to try to defend ourselves from what will interfere with that pleasure. But that pleasure that we're seeking is within ourselves. The Gita tells Najayate Mriyate Bhakadachit that the Atma, the living force within us, is eternal, full of knowledge, full of happiness. According to spiritual tradition, when we engineer our own consciousness in such a way to tap into that source of all bliss, of all happiness, which is the natural love of the soul for God. And when that love is awakened, it naturally extends to every living being, just as if you water the root of a tree, it naturally extends to every part of the tree. Then, whatever we do, whether we're scientists, whether we're technologists, whether we're engineers, whether we're housewives or house husbands, or whether we're teachers, professors, musicians, accountants, farmers, politicians, or little swamis, whatever we do, we are expressing the great wealth and treasure of our love and our compassion through our activities, rather than just trying to get something, get more and more and more to fill an emptiness in our minds and our hearts. I'd like to give an example of an extraordinary revelation in my little life about knowledge. Sometimes just ordinary things we happen to see in our life can really give us clues of where we really want to go. Can I tell? Yes. It's a crazy story. But I warned you. I write about it in this book, actually. This was in 1971. I was living in Nepal. I was seeking fulfillment, meaning, and God. there's a place called Gopinath. And on the hill, there's a beautiful, beautiful Buddhist temple called a stupa. And on the four sides of the steeple, there's eyes looking in all four directions. And he was watching what was going on. I was sitting under a tree meditating. Oh, it was such a quiet forest. There was nothing around except trees and plants. I was just sitting meditating for a couple of hours, feeling the peace. Suddenly I heard, it's really disruptive. And I looked up and there was this gigantic European man. He was really strong. He was definitely some sort of bodybuilder. He was probably about 6'4" or 5" and had massive arms and massive chest and massive shoulders. And he was carrying a bag of groceries. And he was walking, really a rough kind of walk, like stomping. And I kind of looked up and went back into my meditation. Then I heard, and I looked up again, and there was a little gang of monkeys that surrounded him. You know, these were not really huge monkeys. They were little brown monkeys, Nepalese monkeys. They're kind of small. But they really wanted his groceries. And they were in a circle around him. And were looking at him really mean. Their green eyes were staring. And they were showing their teeth. They were screeching. And I was watching. I was asking God, what am I supposed to learn from this? So this Hercules type person, he picked up a giant rock. He was holding his groceries in one arm and he picked up a big rock and started screaming like a warrior and putting the rock around like he was going to pulverize the monkeys. He was going, "Rah!" And the monkeys just looked at him even more angry and came closer and closer and closer. And they were making like little jumps like they were about to jump on him. I couldn't believe what happened next. He dropped the rock and was trembling in fear. And when the monkeys saw how scared he was, one of the little monkeys walked right up to him, took the bag right out of his arms, walked away. And all the monkeys, once they had that bag, they couldn't care less about him. They just gathered around in a circle around the bag to try to grab stuff. And you know what that big bodybuilder from the West did? As soon as the monkeys turned toward the bag, he ran away as fast as he could. I was thinking that was interesting. A few seconds later, a little 5-year-old Nepalese boy, he was really skinny. He had no physical strength whatsoever. He was just a skinny little Nepalese boy. He was skipping through the little forest field, and he saw the monkeys, just about to eat what was in the bag. And he ran toward them, and he picked up a little stone, and all the monkeys scattered in all directions and started climbing up trees to get away from that little boy. And he sat down with the bag and started eating. The monkeys were up in trees watching as he was eating the food in the bag. They were afraid to come near him. And he wasn't like making any shouts, he just ran. He couldn't care less about the monkeys. So I was thinking, what am I supposed to learn from this? That little boy probably didn't weigh as much as one bicep of that man. Why? They had no fear of him with all his physical strength, but they were so afraid of this little tiny Nepalese boy. And then I understood. You see, that man did not live with monkeys. He came from Austria or someplace like that. Because he didn't know monkeys, he feared monkeys. And I'm not a monkey psychologist, but I've been around enough monkeys to know the psychology of a monkey. And I kind of have the same psychology. A monkey will defeat you if they sense the slightest fear in you. But if they don't sense fear in you, they are afraid of you. They're fearless of you if you have fear of them. This little boy, he grew up with monkeys his whole life. He had no fear of them, so they feared him. It's not about physical strength or power. It's about our consciousness. The little boy saw me sitting there watching. And he came up to me and gave me a bunch of bananas from the bag. And as he was handing them to me, I saw all the monkeys get really excited. They were like really excited. And I could understand they were going to attack me. So I told the little boy, I'm not hungry. I realized I was afraid. That was quite a revealing moment in my life. He left me the bananas anyway. And I was thinking, oh no. And the monkeys started coming at me. And you know what I did? I threw the bananas to the monkeys and fed them all. Didn't keep them for myself. And the little boy just walked away with the bag and was happy. Knowledge, real knowledge, is not just about what we can do. Real knowledge is awakening that consciousness of who we really are. And then all the different stresses and different situations of the world, we deal with them from that level. Everyone fears death. Why do we fear death? Because we don't know what's going to happen. Is everything just going to be a blank darkness forever? Do I cease to exist? Or am I going to go to hell? Or maybe I might go to heaven. Or maybe there is no heaven and hell. When we don't understand what death is, we fear death. That same person I was talking about, Bhakti Tirtha Swami, one day, because I was come and spend some hours with him each day, one day his cancer was so intense. It was like right into his bones, and his body was trembling with pain. And I was talking to him like I would talk to him every day, but he couldn't concentrate, I could see. He was just like this. So I just held his hand, and I chanted this Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. We believe this mantra. Man means the mind. Tra means trayate, to liberate, to free the mind of fear and anxiety. Vishayavani vartante niraharasyati, rasavarjam sokyasya param drisvani vartate. And in the school of bhakti, the way we do this is by experiencing something so much deeper and satisfying. That the superficial external situations of the world do not affect us. So I was chanting, and he started chanting with me. And suddenly something happened I'll never forget. It was beautiful. He smiled, an enormous smile. He was an African American. His skin was very dark, and his teeth were very white. And when he smiled, it was practically touching his ears. It was such a smile. And the whole room was lit up. And he shook his head. And tears of joy were flowing from his eyes. And he squeezed my hand and he said, "It doesn't get any better than this." I said, "What do you mean?" His body was still trembling from the pain. But he was somewhere else. He says it doesn't, he said, "I would not trade my position right now for anyone else in the world." He said, "As I'm chanting, I'm tasting the sweetness of Krishna, or God's love. And he said, I know where I'm going. And I'm so happy that I'll be going." He said, "It is so beautiful." The situation didn't change. The pain didn't change. But he was tasting something so sweet, so fulfilling within his own heart, that these were just like ripples on the surface of the river of his consciousness. The monkey of death is going to come for all of us. Kamaladala chala jivaladala. And in today's world, we don't know how long we have. But there's something deep down inside, our own Atma, our own living force, our own soul that is beyond birth and death, that is joyful. And when we actually tap into that, when we connect to that, that's the purpose of religion, that's the purpose of yoga, that's the purpose of spirituality, is to connect to our eternal nature. When we discover the unmotivated love that we have within ourselves, then through whatever we do, we become an instrument of that love. Love is a more powerful motivating force than greed, or arrogance, or even lust, or envy. Some people think if I become too spiritual, I won't be motivated to accomplish things. I think I told you once the story of that accountant school that I was in. Should I tell it again? I was in a school of chartered accountants giving a lecture. It was an auditorium, but there was about 300 students. And I kind of spoke this kind of stuff to them. And at the end, I asked questions. This was in Bombay. And some of the students in Bombay can be very, very enthusiastic. So one raised his hand, and he said, "You are a cheater, you are a liar, you are a hypocrite, and I reject everything you have spoken. What if everyone in the world became a Swami like you? Who would raise the food? Who would govern the state? Who would do the banking and the..." He went on and on. He said, "Therefore I reject you." And he got a standing ovation. For a long time. And they were cheering, they were howling and clapping. And I was just standing up there. How do I answer this question? So I closed my eyes and said a little prayer. My Lord, please answer this question because I don't know what to say. And then I answered the question. I said, "Dear sir, what if everyone in the world became an accountant like you? Who would grow the food? Who would govern the state? Who would do the banking? In fact, if everyone in the world became an accountant like you, there would be 100% unemployment because no one would need an accountant." I said, "The fact is that there is a need for farmers and bankers and politicians, and there's a need for professors and teachers, and there's a need for accountants, and there's needs for little swamis like me too." Just like there are different limbs in the body, and each limb has its very specific, particular function. The knee cannot do what the nose does. The heart cannot do what the lungs do. The toes cannot do what the eyes do. Yes. Each part of the body has its own shape, has its own function. And what makes a healthy body? When all the different parts, with all their different abilities, are working together for the whole body. So similarly, human society, when we have a common purpose, this is called Dharma. In the Bhagavad Gita, I explained, Bhoktaram jagatapasam sarva lokamaheshwaram suhridam sarvatantanam dhyatmanam shantivrajjati. When we all understand this principle, that everything is God's property, and we're just trustees, and we all work together for that common purpose. When we understand our real wisdom, according to the Gita, is to see everyone with equal vision and to honor and respect the living force in every living being. And when we understand that principle, then we all work together in harmony. I'm shy to tell you this, but I will tell you that after I said this, I got a louder standing ovation than he did. So it is very important that we cultivate good character on the basis of inner truths. Otherwise, morality, integrity, and character will easily be washed away by the various circumstances within this world, unless we have a deep spiritual reason. Unless we value that reason. To engineer a better world means to really have a responsibility to God within our heart, to our own health, to our own family members.